Chapter 11, The Shape of Money. Money, Ethan had decided, was armor. Not the point was the people, always the people, but armor for the people, a thickness between his family and the long row of hardships the map promised. In the first life, his father's death had not only taken David, it had dropped the coals through a trapdoor into years of scraping, of 2 jobs and cold winters and choices made out of need instead of love. Even if Ethan saved David's life, the family would still walk straight into the tide as ordinary people with ordinary savings, and ordinary in 2027 meant swept away. Money would not stop the sky from tearing, but it would buy preparation, mobility, time, the difference when the day came between options and helplessness. The trouble was that a 4-year-old could not own $1, let alone move a fortune. He had the knowledge. He could remember, with the sharp clarity of the near years, which small companies became giants, which gambles paid, roughly when the great crash of the late 2000s would come and gut the unready. An almanac of wealth sat in his head. But knowledge you cannot act on is just a different kind of helplessness, and Ethan's only instrument for acting on anything was the same one it had always been. The people around him, steered a half degree at a time. Which meant the money, like everything else, had to move through his father. He could not tell David to buy a stock. But he had learned over 2 years the quiet art of making a man's own idea arrive in his head, wearing the man's own face. It took months of small work. A 4-year-old's fascination with a particular thing, a brand, a logo, a name glimpsed on a television, was the kind of charming nothing a father indulged and repeated, and eventually half believed in himself. Ethan became fascinated, loudly and adorably, with a certain little company whose name he knew would be a household word inside a decade. He drew its logo. He chirped about it. He made it by sheer relentless toddler enthusiasm, a small running joke in the household, Ethan's company, until the name was simply part of the family's air. And then, when David came into a little money that spring, a side job, a few $100s that in the first life had gone toward a debt and vanished, Ethan was there, underfoot with his drawing and his grin, and the seed he had planted bore its small fruit. David, half laughing, told Susan he had a crazy thought, that maybe he'd put a little of it into Ethan's company, just a little, just for fun. The kid was so nuts about it, wouldn't it be something? It was not much. A few $100, into a stock that Ethan knew would, across the patient years, multiply many times over. But it was a beginning, and beginnings were not nothing, and the foundation of his family's armor was poured that day. One small charmed bet, deniable as everything Ethan did was deniable. The other half of the work was darker, and he liked it less, but it mattered as much. He had to steer his father away from ruin. He remembered the bad deal. In the first life, when Ethan was 5, a man David trusted, a fellow contractor, smooth and friendly, had brought him in on a venture that collapsed and took the family's small savings with it. One of the first stones in the avalanche that the death in 1999 would finish. The man would come around again this time. The map was sure of it. And a 5-year-old could not warn his father that his friend was a fool with a doomed scheme. But a 5-year-old could be afraid. When the smooth man finally came to the apartment that autumn, all warmth and big plans, Ethan did the thing he had taught himself to do, the thing his parents had come, over years, to half trust. He fussed. He went shy and clinging and wrong around the man, hid behind his father's leg, would not be coaxed out. Woke that night crying from a bad dream, he would not explain. He made himself, by every small instinctive signal a child owns. A little weather vane swinging hard toward something is wrong here. And his parents, who had learned to listen when Ethan fussed, who told each other the boy had a sense, felt the wind change. It was not the only reason David hesitated over the deal. But it was a weight on the right side of the scale, dropped at the right moment, and David did hesitate and asked harder questions than he had the first time, and in the end did not put the family's money in. When the venture collapsed the next year, the Coles were not in it. Ethan watched the avalanche that had buried his family the first time simply fail to start, and felt the cold seed stir in his chest, deep and certain, the way it always did when he bent the world hard. But that night, lying awake, he also felt the first real edge of fear about the money, not for his family, but for himself. Because money left tracks. A lucky bet was charming. A pattern of impossibly lucky bets, year after year. A family that always bought right and always sold first and always, somehow, stepped off the road just before the truck came. That was not charming. That was the kind of thing that, given enough time, made smart people look closely at the Coles and ask how. And how was the one question Ethan could never let anyone answer. He would have to be careful. More careful with the money in some ways than with the power. He would have to lose, sometimes on purpose. He would have to let small misfortunes through, to keep the family ordinary on the surface, to keep the pattern from forming into a shape a stranger could read. Foreknowledge of wealth was a blade with no handle. Grip it too hard and it cut you. He filed the rule away with the others. Move the money like the world, early, small, and never in a pattern. Be lucky, not impossibly lucky. Lose enough to stay invisible. It went against everything the tired, scraping man of his first life wanted to scream. Take it all, take everything, we were so poor. We suffered so much, just take it. But Ethan had not come back to be rich. He had come back to keep 4 people alive through the end of the world, and invisibility was worth more than any fortune. He let the screaming part of himself have its moment in the dark, where no one could see. Then he set it down with everything else, and went back to the patient business of growing a small armor, quietly, beneath a family that would never know it was being protected.